October 14, 1944, 12:05 p.m. A small village called Herrlingen, Germany. A dark green car with Berlin plates stops outside a modest house surrounded by an autumn garden. Two generals step out. Their uniforms are immaculate, their faces expressionless. They're not here to deliver orders, they're here to deliver death. Inside, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, Germany's most celebrated general, sits at breakfast with his 15-year-old son Manfred. Rommel is 52 years old, still recovering from a skull fracture suffered 3 months earlier when British fighters strafed his staff car in Normandy. He's wearing his favorite Africa tunic with the open collar, the uniform that made him a legend. In exactly 15 minutes, he'll be dead, murdered by his own government. Forced to swallow cyanide by the regime he served. But here's what makes this story extraordinary. Here's what history almost lost. When American intelligence officer Charles Marshall interviewed Rommel's widow Lucie in September 1945, just months after Germany's surrender, she told him everything. The final conversation. The terrible choice, the last words Rommel spoke before he walked out to die. Words that revealed not just how a hero fell, but why he chose to die rather than fight, why he believed it was better to sacrifice himself than to let his family face Hitler's vengeance. This is the story of Rommel's last day. Not the propaganda version the Nazis fed the German people, not the sanitized legend that emerged after the war, but the raw, horrifying truth as told by the woman who loved him. The son who watched him leave, and the records that American interrogators carefully preserved. A story of impossible choices, of loyalty tested beyond breaking, and of final words that haunt everyone who hears them. The man waiting for the generals that October morning seems impossibly far from the legendary commander who humiliated the British in North Africa, who earned Churchill's grudging respect, who forced Eisenhower to rethink Allied strategy completely. But Erwin Rommel in 1944 is a different man than the Desert Fox of 1941. He's seen too much, learned too much, and it's destroyed his faith in everything he once believed. Rommel's disillusionment doesn't happen all at once. It builds gradually, piece by piece, revelation by revelation. In early 1943, when he returns from Africa and tour bombed-out German cities for the first time, he's shocked by the devastation. The propaganda has hidden the truth from commanders in the field. German cities are being systematically destroyed. Civilian morale is crumbling. The regime is lying about everything. Then he learns about the death camps, the systematic murder of Jews, the slave labor, the exterminations. His chief of staff cautiously mentions what's happening in Poland, in the east. Rommel is horrified. This isn't the Germany he thought he was fighting for. This isn't the nation he's sacrificed so much to defend. By the time Hitler assigns him to fortify the Atlantic Wall in late 1943, Rommel has concluded that Germany cannot win the war. The industrial might of America, the determination of Britain, and the vast resources of the Soviet Union all make German victory impossible. Every day the war continues, Germany suffers more. More cities bombed, more young men dead, more territory lost, and for what? To prolong the fantasy of a madman, Rommel begins having conversations. Careful, coded discussions with other officers who share his doubts. He doesn't join a conspiracy, not exactly. He doesn't plan assassinations or coups, but he listens, he nods. He lets it be known that if Germany is to survive, changes must be made. Hitler must go. A separate peace must be negotiated with the Western Allies before the Russians overrun everything. It's treason, by Nazi standards, it's absolutely treason, and it will cost him everything. July 17, 1944, 3 days before someone tries to kill Hitler with a bomb. Rommel is inspecting defenses in Normandy when British Spitfires strafe his staff car on a country road. His driver is killed instantly. Rommel suffers a fractured skull, a shattered cheekbone, facial lacerations, and severe concussion. He's rushed to a hospital unconscious, his face a mass of blood and broken bone. For weeks, he hovers between life and death. When he finally regains consciousness and begins the slow, painful recovery, he's sent home to Herrlingen to convalesce under Lucie's care. He's out of the war, done, he'll never command again. At 52, with his injuries, his military career is over. He doesn't know it yet, but so is his life. On July 20th, while Rommel lies in a hospital bed barely conscious, a bomb explodes in Hitler's headquarters in East Prussia. Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg has placed a briefcase bomb under the conference table during a strategy meeting. The explosion kills 4 men. Hitler survives with minor injuries. And in the savage reprisals that follow, thousands will die. The Gestapo arrests everyone with even the slightest connection to the plot. Under torture, some suspects mention names. One of those names is Rommel. His chief of staff, Hans Spadel, is arrested. Under interrogation, Spadel, trying to deflect suspicion from himself, mentions conversations with Rommel about Germany's situation. Another conspirator, tortured beyond endurance, claims Rommel knew about plans to remove Hitler. It's enough, more than enough, because Rommel has committed an even greater crime in Hitler's eyes. He's lost faith, he's spoken defeatism, he suggested that Germany might lose the war. For a general, for a field marshal who wears the Knight's Cross with oak leaves, swords and diamonds, Germany's highest military honor, this is unforgivable. Hitler faces a problem. Rommel is a national hero. The German people love him. He's been lionized in propaganda as the perfect soldier, the brilliant tactician, the knight in desert tan who fought clean wars against honorable enemies. To publicly try Rommel for treason, to drag him before a people's court, to execute him like a common traitor, would devastate German morale at a time when Germany needs every ounce of will to continue fighting. The solution is characteristically Nazi in its cynicism: force Rommel to commit suicide, give him cyanide. Then announce he died from his battle wounds, give him a state funeral with full military honors, and turn his death into propaganda. The people never need to know their hero was a traitor. Hitler gets revenge, and Germany keeps its legend. Hitler sends orders through Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel. 2 generals, Wilhelm Burgdorf and Ernst Maysel, are dispatched to Herrlingen with poison and instructions. They arrive on October 14th at noon. They bring with them a simple but monstrous choice. Manfred Rommel arrives home that morning on emergency leave from his anti-aircraft unit. He's 15 years old, tall like his father, with the same serious eyes. He finds his father at breakfast, still wearing civilian clothes, the brown jacket he prefers around the house. They eat together, they talk. Rommel mentions that 2 generals are coming at noon to discuss his future employment. At 12 o'clock today, 2 generals are coming to discuss my future employment, Rommel tells his son. So today will decide what is planned for me, whether a people's court or a new command in the East. Manfred asks if he would accept a command in the East, fighting against the Russians. Rommel takes his son's arm. His answer reveals everything about his character, everything about the impossible position he's in. My dear boy, our enemy in the East is so terrible that every other consideration has to give way before it. If he succeeds in overrunning Europe, even only temporarily, it will be the end of everything which has made life appear worth living. Of course I would go, he would go. Even knowing what he knows about the Nazi regime, even having lost all faith in Hitler, even believing Germany cannot win. Rommel would still fight against the Soviet Union because he believes Stalin's totalitarianism is worse than Hitler's. It's the tragic contradiction at the heart of so many German officers, the moral compromise that let them continue serving a regime they knew was evil. Shortly before noon, Rommel goes upstairs and changes into his Afrika tunic, his favorite uniform. The one he wore commanding the Afrika Corps when the world seemed simpler, when the war seemed winnable, when he still believed he was fighting for something worthwhile. At exactly 12 o'clock, the dark green car stops outside the garden gate. Generals Bergdorf and Mazel are respectful, almost courteous. Bergdorf is a powerful, florid man, the chief of the Army Personnel Office. Mazel is small and slender. They ask Rommel's permission to speak with him alone. Captain Aldinger, Rommel's aide, and Manfred leave the room. The house is surrounded by Gestapo agents with orders to storm the building if Rommel resists. The conversation lasts perhaps 10 minutes. Then Rommel comes upstairs to find his wife. Lucie Rommel is in her room when her husband enters. According to what she later told American interrogators, according to what Manfred witnessed, Rommel's face is pale, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. "Come outside with me," he tells Manfred. They go into Manfred's room, and there, Rommel speaks the words that Lucie will repeat to Charles Marshal a year later, the words that Manfred will remember until his death in 2013. "I have just had to tell your mother that I shall be dead in a quarter of an hour. The room must seem to stop. Time must freeze. How do you process those words from your father? How does a 15-year-old boy comprehend that his hero, his father, the most famous general in Germany, has just been sentenced to death by his own government?" Rommel continues, his voice calm now, factual. "To die by the hand of one's own people is hard. But the house is surrounded, and Hitler is charging me with high treason." He quotes sarcastically, bitterly, "In view of my services in Africa, I am to have the chance of dying by poison. The two generals have brought it with them. It's fatal in 3 seconds. If I accept, none of the usual steps will be taken against my family, that is against you. They will also leave my staff alone. This is the deal. This is the terrible bargain. Take the poison, die quietly, and Lucie will be spared. Manfred will be spared. Captain Aldinger and the household staff will be spared. Refuse, and everyone dies. The Gestapo will arrest Lucie. Manfred will be sent to a concentration camp or simply disappeared. The staff will be executed as accomplices. And Rommel himself will be dragged before a people's court, publicly humiliated, tortured for information about other conspirators, and then hanged with piano wire. His death filmed for Hitler's entertainment. "Do you believe it?" Manfred asks, desperate, hoping somehow this is a bluff, a threat that can be negotiated. "Yes," Rommel replies, "I believe it. It is very much in their interest to see that the affair does not come out into the open." Then he adds something that reveals how thoroughly the Nazis have thought this through. "By the way, I have been charged to put you under a promise of the strictest silence. If a single word of this comes out, they will no longer feel themselves bound by the agreement." Manfred asks if they can defend themselves. There are weapons in the house. They could barricade the doors, fight back. It's the desperate thought of a 15-year-old who cannot accept that his father must die. Rommel cuts him off short. "There's no point. It's better for one to die than for all of us to be killed in a shooting affray. Anyway, we've practically no ammunition. This is the calculation, one death versus many, his life for theirs." And Rommel, the soldier, the general who always calculated odds and made hard decisions, makes his final tactical choice. He'll take the poison. He'll die quietly. He'll let them turn his death into propaganda if that's what it takes to save his family. They take leave of each other. Briefly, there's no time for long goodbyes. "Call Aldinger, please," Rommel says. Captain Aldinger comes running upstairs. The general's escort has been keeping him distracted, engaged in meaningless conversation to ensure he doesn't interfere. When Aldinger hears what's happening, he's struck cold. Frozen, this can't be real, but it is. Rommel speaks quickly now, time is running out. It's all been prepared to the last detail. "I'm to be given a state funeral. I have asked that it should take place in Ulm." He looks at his watch. "I must go, they've only given me 10 minutes. Then he turns to Aldinger with instructions that reveal how bizarre, how surreal this whole situation is. "In a quarter of an hour, You, Oldinger, will receive a telephone call from the Wagnerschule Reserve Hospital in Ulm to say that I've had a brain seizure on the way to a conference. Everything planned. Everything scripted, even the lie that will explain his death. They go downstairs together. Lucie helps Rommel into his leather coat. He's going to die, but he's going to be properly dressed. Suddenly he pulls out his wallet. There's still 150 marks in there, he says. The question hangs absurdly in the air. Shall I take the money with me? That doesn't matter now, Herr Field Marshal, Oldinger says gently. Rommel puts the wallet back carefully. Habit, order, maintaining normalcy even in this moment. As he enters the hall, his little dachshund, a puppy he'd been given in France months before, jumps up at him, whining with joy. Shut the dog in the study, Manfred, he says. He waits while his son removes the excited animal and pushes it through the study door. Then they walk outside together. The crunch of gravel under their feet sounds unusually loud in the October stillness. Villagers stand watching at a distance. They know something important is happening, but they don't know what. The two generals stand at the garden gate. As Rommel approaches, they raise their right hands in salute. Herr Field Marshal, Bergdorf says shortly, standing aside. The SS driver swings the car door open and stands at attention. Rommel pushes his marshal's baton under his left arm, the baton he earned leading the Afrika Korps. The symbol of his rank, his achievement, his service to Germany. He shakes hands with Oldinger and Manfred one final time. His face is calm. Then he gets into the car. The generals climb in quickly. Doors slam. Rommel doesn't turn to look back as the car drives up the hill and disappears around a bend in the road. Oldinger and Manfred stand watching until it's gone. Then they walk silently back into the house. 20 minutes later, at exactly the time Rommel predicted, the telephone rings. Oldinger lifts the receiver. A doctor from the Wagnerschule Reserve Hospital in Ulm reports that Field Marshal Rommel has died of a brain seizure on his way to a military conference. The lie is now official. What happened in those 20 minutes, the family learns later. The car drove only a few hundred yards up the hill to an open space at the edge of the woods. Gestapo agents were positioned throughout the area, watching, ready to intervene if anything went wrong. General Maisel and the driver got out of the car, leaving Rommel alone with General Bergdorf. Bergdorf handed Rommel a small vial, cyanide. Fatal in 3 seconds, they'd told him. Rommel took it. He bit down on the capsule. The poison worked exactly as promised. When the driver was permitted to return 10 minutes later, he found Rommel slumped forward in his seat, his cap fallen off, his marshal's baton dropped from his hand. The desert fox was dead. Murdered by the regime he'd served with distinction for decades, the propaganda machine moved quickly. That evening, Radio Berlin announced with great solemnity that Field Marshal Erwin Rommel had succumbed to injuries sustained in the Allied air attack in Normandy. The Führer was deeply grieved. The nation mourned a hero. On October 18th, 4 days after his death, Rommel received a state funeral in Ulm. Hitler sent a massive wreath. Field Marshal von Rundstedt delivered a eulogy praising Rommel's courage, skill, and loyalty to Germany. Thousands lined the streets. Not one of them knew the truth. Not one of them knew their hero had been murdered. Lucie Rommel knew, Manfred knew, Captain Oldinger knew, and they kept silent because they had no choice. The Gestapo watched them constantly. Any word, any suggestion that Rommel had been forced to commit suicide, and the deal was off. The family would die just as surely as Erwin had died, so they maintained the fiction. They attended the funeral. They accepted condolences. They let Hitler turn their husband and father into a propaganda tool even in death. And they waited. The waiting ends in May 1945 when Germany surrenders. American and French forces occupy Herrlingen, and intelligence officers begin asking questions. They've heard rumors. Stories about officers forced to commit suicide, about show trials and purges. They want to know what really happened to Germany's most famous general. Charles Marshall, an American intelligence officer, is assigned to interview the Rommel family. In September 1945, just 4 months after the war ends, he sits down with Lucie Rommel. She's 51 years old, a widow, protective of her husband's memory, but finally free to speak the truth. She tells Marshal everything, the generals arriving at noon, the impossible choice. Erwin's final words to their son, the calm way he walked to his death, the phone call confirming his murder. She provides dates, names, specific details. She signs a sworn deposition. For the first time, the world learns that Rommel didn't die from battle wounds. He was murdered by his own government for the crime of losing faith in Hitler. But here's what's fascinating about Lucie's testimony. She's adamant about one thing. Erwin was not part of the July 20th assassination plot. He knew some of the conspirators. He'd had conversations about ending the war, but he opposed assassinating Hitler. He believed that killing Hitler would spark a civil war, that it would make Hitler a martyr, that it would accomplish nothing. According to Lucie, according to what Erwin told her in their private conversations, Rommel favored a different approach. Arrest Hitler, remove him from power, put him on trial if necessary. But not assassination, too dangerous, too likely to backfire. Whether this is true or whether Lucie is trying to protect her husband's reputation even in death, historians still debate. Some evidence suggests Rommel was more involved than he admitted to his family. Other evidence suggests he really was on the periphery, guilty mainly of defeatist talk rather than active conspiracy. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. Rommel knew, he listened. He didn't actively participate, but he didn't report the conspirators either. In Nazi Germany, that silence was treasonous enough. What's not debatable is Rommel's disillusionment. By 1944, he'd completely lost faith in Hitler's leadership. He believed Germany was committing suicide by continuing the war, and he was willing to say so, at least to trusted colleagues. In the paranoid world of Nazi Germany, that was a death sentence. Manfred Rommel lives until 2013, dying at age 84. He becomes mayor of Stuttgart, serving 3 terms, respected and loved by the city. He maintains a decades-long friendship with David Montgomery, son of Bernard Montgomery, his father's greatest adversary in North Africa. The sons of enemies become friends, a small redemption in a story full of tragedy. In his later years, Manfred speaks publicly about that October day. He describes his father's calm demeanor, the impossible choice, the final handshake. He remembers every detail with crystal clarity. How could he forget? It's the day he learned that even heroes can be forced to die, that loyalty to a criminal regime is no virtue, that sometimes the bravest choice is accepting death to save those you love. Manfred tells interviewers that his father never stopped believing he'd made the right choice. The poison instead of the trial, the state funeral instead of public humiliation. One death instead of many. It was the soldier's calculation, the general's tactical decision. Sacrifice the peace to save the game, but was it the right choice? That question haunts everyone who hears this story. Could Rommel have fought back? Could he have used his fame, his reputation, his connections to expose the regime's crimes? Could he have refused the poison, demanded a public trial, used it as a platform to tell the German people the truth about Hitler? Maybe. Or maybe he would have simply died screaming under torture, his family murdered anyway, his death filmed for Hitler's amusement. We'll never know because Rommel chose the path he chose. He took the poison, he died quietly, he let them turn him into a propaganda saint. What we do know is what Lucie told American interrogators, what Manfred witnessed, what the historical record confirms. Rommel died believing he was saving his family. He died maintaining his dignity. He died rather than betray his principles completely, rather than give the Nazis the satisfaction of breaking him publicly. His final words to his son, "To die by the hand of one's own people is hard," encapsulate the entire tragedy. Rommel served Germany, not Hitler. He fought for what he believed was his country's survival, not for Nazi ideology. But by the time he realized the distinction, it was too late. He was trapped, compromised, caught between loyalty to Germany and recognition of Hitler's evil. The story of Rommel's death is about impossible choices. It's about what happens when good men serve evil regimes, when honor is weaponized by tyranny, when fame becomes a liability instead of protection. It's about a widow forced to keep terrible secrets, a son forced to watch his father walk to murder, a general forced to choose how he'll die. But it's also about truth eventually emerging. About witnesses who survive to testify, about American interrogators who carefully document what they're told, about historical records that preserve the reality beneath the propaganda. When Lucie Rommel signed that deposition in September 1945, when she told Charles Marshall exactly what her husband said in his final minutes, she gave the world something invaluable: the truth. Not the Nazi lie about battle wounds and heroic death, not the post-war legend of Rommel, the resistance fighter, just the truth. A man forced to choose between a terrible death and an honorable one. A husband and father calculating that his death could save those he loved. A general making his final tactical decision. That truth is uncomfortable. It doesn't give us easy heroes or simple villains. It gives us humans in impossible situations, making choices we hope we'll never face, living with consequences that echo through generations. The Desert Fox died on a country road in Germany, murdered by the regime he served. His widow told interrogators the truth. His son carried the burden his entire life. And history recorded it all, preserving the final words, the impossible choice, the price of serving tyrants. What do you think? Did Rommel make the right choice by taking the poison to save his family? Or should he have refused, demanded a public trial, used his fame to expose the regime even at the cost of his family's lives? It's an impossible question with no right answer, but it's one that resonates today. When do you compromise with evil? When do you resist regardless of cost? When does protecting your family outweigh all other considerations? Leave your thoughts in the comments. If you want to explore more stories about the moral compromises and impossible choices of World War II, check out the video about the July 20th plotters. Or dive into the story of Klaus von Stauffenberg, the man who actually tried to kill Hitler. History isn't just about battles and dates. It's about human beings facing impossible dilemmas, making choices we can judge but never fully understand unless we've stood where they stood. Hit that like button if this story made you think. Subscribe for more deep dives into the moments that reveal who we are when everything is on the line. Share this with anyone who thinks history is simple, who believes in easy heroes and clear villains. Because Rommel's story proves that real history is messy, complicated, and profoundly human. The widow told interrogators the truth. Now you know it too. The question is, what do we learn from it?